Hey again, guys. I had a viewer who wanted me to kind of share my story of growing up and building my collection when I was young. And I was doing a little reflecting today, thinking back on my childhood a little bit. I started collecting at a very young age. My mom claimed she started buying me cards when I was 2 years old. But I remember opening a pack specifically at this little convenience store. They were quite different convenience stores back then. They weren't like, the 7-Elevens and those types of stores today. But it's a little private dairy shop, with a little bit of food. And they had these baseball cards, and they were 1973. And I specifically remember opening them. I'm not positive the price, although I could look at the wrapper, but I believe they were 5 cents, something like that. And so that was my first recollection of ever buying a pack of baseball cards. And I was just fascinated with baseball growing up. My father was a baseball fanatic. My grandmother was a baseball fanatic. She never missed a Pirate game. And so I had this babysitter, and one day she brought me over a big box of cards because she saw me playing with the cards that I had, and she knew I was a baseball card fanatic and I was a baseball fanatic. And she comes over with this big box of cards, and it was all 1971, 72, and there were some 73s in there. And she also had the 1970 scratch-offs. And so I had this big box of cards, and I was just fascinated with them because they had predated any cards I bought, and they were really the first vintage cards I ever got my hands on. And there was this one kid who moved in across the street from me, and he had an older brother. It was like an older half brother, I guess, and they didn't live together, but they didn't see each other too often. But at one point, he gave him a bunch of older cards, from a few years prior. And he had a Roberto Clemente, 1966 Roberto Clemente. It was all wrinkled. It was in bad shape, like somebody had it in their pocket. But man, I wanted that card, and I eventually traded him for that. And that was the first Clemente card I had ever seen, and it was the first Clemente card I had ever gotten. So he and we were like one day best friends, and the next day we were wrestling around, fighting in the yard and everything. And he had a guy that lived with his mother. And he was a big guy. He's actually the guy that taught me how to work out when I was in the 9th grade. And we were wrestling around in the front yard, and he came out and he grabbed us each by the collar, and he just threw us in 2 different directions. And he's like, you need to stop this. You one day you're friends, the next day you're fighting. But anyway, he had a bunch of cards, and so I would trade with him. At one time, we used to trade like coin collection for cards and cards for coin collection. At one time, he traded me all his football cards. And I later traded those all for baseball cards. We would do things like this. And there were other kids in the neighborhood who would collect as well. And got into a situation where this one kid was taking my cards. And there were these 2 brothers. And I'll go back to that in a second. So there were these 2 brothers. One was real big, and the other one was ornery. He was just a bad kid. And the big kid, I got a hold of some boxing gloves at one point. And he was a little younger than me, but he was way bigger. And he'd sneak into my basement. We put on the boxing gloves, and we'd go to town. And my mom used to joke around with her friends. She'd say, there's this one neighbor kid. He comes up, they beat the hell out of each other, and then he goes home. So one day I hit him with a shot, and I knocked him out. He went flying down to the ground, scared the crap out of us. And so that was the last time we boxed, because I actually thought, I was going to get in trouble or something. So this other kid used to steal my baseball cards, and we used to get together. We'd have big boxes, and we'd take them to each other's homes. We'd have sleepovers. We'd take our cards. And we used to play different kinds of flipping games. And one of our favorite flipping games is we would each take so many cards, and we would line them up against the wall in my house. And you would take a card and you would throw it like a frisbee, and whatever cards you knocked down, you got to keep. Not too great for condition, but that's the game we played, and we used to love to play it. And so I acquired a lot of cards playing that game. But this kid started to steal my cards. And So we had it out, and his mother, I guess he told his mother, and she got in the middle of it. And her solution was write for them to write their initials on the back of all their cards. Well, I mean, I was a kid, but I wasn't stupid. So you steal my cards, take them home, write your initials on the back, and that proves they're yours. So I had enough of it. One day, he was on his bike, and I grew up in the country, and there's nobody around, and we had this big circular road throughout the neighborhood. And I was at the top, and he was all the way down at the bottom. And I went marching down there, and I confronted him. And I'm like, I want my baseball cards back. And he wouldn't give them back to me, so I punched him. And he said, I'm like, I want my baseball cards back. And he wouldn't get them back, so I punched him again. And still wouldn't give them back. I hit him a third time, as hard as I could. And he just wouldn't fight me, and he wouldn't give me my cards back. And that taught me a valuable lesson for life, because I was the one that walked away feeling horrible. Like, I felt bad, because I felt bad for hitting him, especially because he wouldn't hit me back. He wouldn't engage. And that's actually something I use in my adult life. You know, if somebody comes up to you and says, you're an idiot. I mean, the best defense is no defense, because if you engage somebody, it's just going to escalate and make it even worse. So when somebody says, you're stupid, I say, you know what? You're right. A lot of people tell me that. But I'm actually a nice guy. Let's talk about this. You know, that kind of thing. It's called diffusion. Anyway, so we had this flea market. It was at a fire hall. And we would walk down there, we'd gather change. I don't even know where we got this. And we would go down there. It was the only place I could find vintage cards. And I would go down there every Sunday. And we had to walk a mile through the woods to this flea market. And then we had to walk even farther to the stores that sold baseball cards. And there was this one little newsstand, and they sold them. And we would go down there almost every day in the summer. And we would gather up whatever change we had. We had cans of it. And we would go and we would buy baseball cards. Now, this was around 1978 at this point. And so I distinctly remember doing that in 78, 79, 80. And I remember when the Donruss and Fleer cards came out, we had a new Sheets open up in our town, which was a big deal. And it was even farther away. And we would walk there, and we couldn't get enough of the Donruss and the Fleer, because it was so exciting to have other cards other than Topps to collect. But we would walk that all the time, always looking for baseball cards. And then when I would go to the mall, we had a Walden bookstore, and I would just go straight to the baseball section, always looking for a baseball book. I would buy my hands on any magazine, any book I could get my hands on. And I remember my mom, I have a distinct memory of her talking to the salesperson, and she's like, when we were checking out, and she's like, all he wants to do is I got to buy him all these baseball books. And the sales clerk said, well, there's worse things that he could be into, right? And I remember that it was that store that I first saw that book by, Burt Randolph, Sugar, with the cutouts. And man, I had to have that. And I would go home and look through there. And then when I got older, you know, those cards, like in particular, I remember like the 38 Gaudy DiMaggio, the 33 Tattoo Orbit Dizzy Dean. So cards that I saw in that book, I wanted. And when I got a little older and had a little bit more money to spend, and I'd walk to that flea market, I would seek out any cards I could find. And we would have people drive us if we heard there was a flea market in another town, because that was the only place I could find vintage cards. Now, by the time I was in the 9th grade, I had amassed a pretty substantial vintage collection, mostly from the 50s, 60s, some 40s, some 33s probably, Gaudy. I can't remember specifically. But I remember sitting in, at school during free period, and I would checklist the cards that I had, and I'm writing all these cards. I remember somebody looked over my shoulder one day, and they're like, you have all those? I had like 56 Jackie Robinson, 56 Ted Williams, and I used to just catalog them. So when I got a little older, I got out of collecting. You know, I always had them. So at this point, my parents were ready to move out of their house, and they had put their house on the market, and my mom got a call one day, and they said, we showed your house today, and they don't want to put an offer on the house, but they want to make an offer on all the baseball cards that are in that one room. And so that's kind of funny, because I had them all spread out all over my room. So then anyway, when I went to college and everything, I got out of it, and I took it back up again in the either late, around 90, 91-ish, somewhere in there. And I collected for a few years, and then I got out of it again, and I had all my cards stored in my parents' basement, and they were moving again. And I was married at this point, in my 30s, and my mom called me and said, you have to come and get all these cards. We're moving. And I'm like, oh no, I had this small little house, and I had just gotten married. Now, I had told my wife that I had a very large baseball card collection, but I don't think she realized what I meant by that. So one day she came home from work, and the entire house was filled with boxes. And I wish I had taken a video of the expression on her face when she walked through the door. It was priceless. I mean, her mouth dropped. Like, what the hell is this, right? And I'm like, I told you I had a big baseball card collection. And she's like, I had no idea. I had like pretty much every set from, 70, probably 70 on of tops, or near set, not necessarily complete sets, but just binders, boxes. And at this point, in my early 20s, this is when I really started to buy tobacco cards, T205s, that kind of thing. And I used to buy them sight unseen, because we get these catalogs back then. There was no internet. And I bought a lot from Kit Young Cards, and they had a woman there, and I used to call her up, and I'd be like, I'm interested in this. Could you explain it in a little more detail? And she would explain the centering and the surface and the corners to me. And she did a great job. Like, every card I got was exactly as she described. I remember specifically buying a 1969 Mickey Mantle card that way. And I called her up, and I'm like, I really want this card. It was, for whatever reason, that was one of my favorite Mantle cards growing up, and I never acquired one. So I finally wanted to pull the trigger and get that one. And so when I called her, she was like, it's not perfect, but the corners are pretty nice. Centering's just a little bit off, and this and that. And she described it perfectly. And that was one of the first cards I ever sent in to get grading, and it got a 6. So it was, she described it perfectly. And I still buy cards from Kit Young today. I always liked that dealer. But they used to send out a catalog, and there were others too. But that's how you'd buy mail order back then. And so that's, I can't remember what really turned me on to baseball, other than my dad was a sports fanatic. But once I got like a bat and a ball in my hand, I was kind of like a natural. We used to go to, picnics and stuff, and there'd be a game. And I remember one time they made me quit because I kept hitting the house with my balls. That didn't come out right with the baseball. And they actually made me quit playing. I remember I was so mad. And I would go to New Jersey, and my friends lived next to a Puerto Rican family, and they would invite us out. We'd go out there for pig roasts and stuff. It was awesome. But these kids could play some ball, and we used to go and have pickup games, and we'd play out there. And man, I couldn't get enough baseball. And I remember I was in an itty bitty, and I don't know how old I was, but I was tiny. And so there were always like 2 good kids in every class. And if you were the best kid on the team, you played shortstop, period. That's just where you played. And then you were one of the top recruit going into Little League. And so when I played shortstop, I was on cloud 9. And I was, my dad taught me to get in front of the ball. So I was a good little infielder. And one day a ball took a bad hop, hit me right in the eye. And my mom came home, and my dad has a stake on it. And she's freaking out. And after that, I wouldn't get in front of a ball for many years. And it didn't really bother me because Clemente was my idol. And I wanted to play outfield anyway. I wanted to be a right fielder like Roberto Clemente. So I had, in 5th grade at recess, we had a Roberto Clemente book. And every recess, I would sit there and I would read that book. And finally, one day, my teacher came up to me and she said, just take it home with you. And she gave it to me. It was all wrinkled. Man, I read that over and over. And in that book, it had some amazing pictures. But he said that he used to squeeze a rubber ball to strengthen his arm. And, he had the best arm ever. And so that's what I did. Every day I would squeeze that ball and I would stand at the neighbor's yard and hit my dad in the chest with that ball over and over and over and throw from the outfield. And I remember my dad being so proud of me one day. There was a guy hit a ball into the gap and it went to the wall. And I always had that vision of Willie Mays catching that ball and turning and firing it. And so I went and I got that ball as fast as I could and I barehanded it, turned around and fired it to second. And the guy held him to a single. And my dad was telling all his friends how I held this kid to a single with a shot in the gap. One of the highlights of my Little League career. But in all fairness, he probably wasn't the fastest runner. Then we had this one really big, tall kid, and he could throw he was like twice as big as every kid in the league. And I had to face him. We had a guy on second and third, and we were down a run, right? And there's 2 outs, and I come to bat, and he's throwing the heat. I felt like I was up against Nolan Ryan. And he threw the first ball, and I am telling you, I literally closed my eyes and swung. And it hit off the bat handle. It just barely blooped into center. And everybody scored and we won the game. And everybody's cheering me. And I'm humiliated because I closed my eyes and it was a total luck hit. I barely touched the ball. But those are some good memories when I think back to those times. So anyway, I had moved to South Carolina in 2004. And I stopped collecting again just because I started traveling all over the place for work. With what I do, I would have to take a second apartment or, at one point we had 4 different places. I was working 2 different places. My wife was working 2 different places and, we had our main house and it was just ridiculous. And so I had to move around a lot and I just got out of collecting. I didn't even have anywhere to send the cards to. I was never home and nobody was there. And in 2014, we had to move and buy another place for my wife's work. And I was spending all my time at my main house and I would barely go back and forth. And so I think my wife she finangled a way to keep me there. And she said one day, I had all my cards in climate controlled storage facility, all locked away and nice and neat. And one day she said, why don't you make a card room here? Because she knew that I'd stay there if I did that. And I'm like, that's a good idea. Because my parents let me make a card room out of their spare room for a little while when I was little. And then when they moved, they had a half-finished basement that they didn't use. And the part that was finished was, I set up cards there. And when they would have people come over, everybody wanted to come downstairs and get a tour of my cards and look through my cards. And that was a fun time for me. So let's do it. And so it was like a project of mine for weeks. And, I still work on it. And so I got all my cards out of storage. Rented a U-Haul, brought them all in and made that. Although I have them multiple places, I can't even fit them all in one. And I just don't like having them in one place. So, I have lots that are protected. I pull them out to make videos and so forth, and then I take them back. But that's pretty much my story of collecting, how I got started, and, a little bit about my background. So as always, thanks for watching.